unSILOed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.
Welcome to unSILOed. This is Greg LeBlanc. I'm here today with Francis Frei, who is a professor at Harvard Business School and also the author of a bunch of books. Most recent book is called Move Fast and Fix Things, right? The Trusted Leader's Guide to Solving Hard Problems, which I think of as a sequel to this previous book, which you also co-authored. All of your books are co-authored with Ann Morris. This one's called Unleashed, the Unapologetic Leader's Guide to Empowering Everyone Around You. And your first book was this one, Uncommon Service, How to Win by Putting Customers at the Core of Your Business. Welcome, Francis.
Thank you so much, Greg. Delighted to be here.
Now, these books tell a story which tracks the story of your academic research, your academic journey. And when I read this book, Uncommon Service, this reminded me, right, of some of the things that you taught me actually way back in the day around operations, because it really is all about delivering high quality service. How do you identify what you mean by high quality service, how you make the relevant trade-offs, and how you design a strategy and a culture for delivering on those promises. And the later books, I think, really are, you could say, more about leadership, but I see strong connections. Do you think that this shift from a focus more on operations to one on leadership is one that we all go through? I mean, I teach courses on digital transformation, and my background is more in finance and organizational economics, but I find that I have to spend an enormous amount of time on things like leadership and culture and trust building. And without that, you just simply can't do digital transformation or any kind of change management. I mean, is that a journey that I think all academic researchers and people with more of an economics background have to ultimately grapple with?
I don't know if it's all. I can tell you that for me, I got my grounding in operations. It sounds like you got your grounding in economics, but I needed the grounding in operations. And honestly, if I didn't come across that many of the issues that were stopping us from excelling were the pesky people, I never would have gone to leadership. So I was just very merrily working on service excellence and, you know, and all of that. But as we were addressing bigger and bigger problems, the people were becoming more prominent. Now, had I not had the background in operations, I don't know that I could have rigorously understood leadership. So for anyone who's listening, if you want to study leadership, go study math first. and you can do it math in operations, math in econ, but get the rigor first. And then you might be most appreciative of the awesomeness of the leadership study, which is, yes, we have all of these problems. We can't solve them any other way but to address the people issues on top.
Yeah, and in this latest book, I mean, I think you're trying to lay out an instruction guide for how to create an internal way, a scalable and repeatable way of identifying problems and then solving those problems. And I think of that as really, I mean, I do think of that as a production process.
That's an operations love letter, Greg.
Yeah.
That's an scalable, repeatable. It's an operations love letter.
Right. And so, I mean, if the output is innovation or if the output is continuous improvement, then the enemy, I mean, from an operations perspective is work in progress, right? You know, like you have all of these initiatives that just kind of get bogged down. And so in many ways, it's also a discussion around agile improvement, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Is there a certain culture that you need to have to do anything in agile, whether it's software development or, you know, innovation
I think
activities?
that there's good hygiene. So if we take the work in process and that's the enemy, and it all goes back to, I think, John Little and Little's Law, and when he taught us that the start to finish time of anything equals how fast you can do it and all the things you got to do in front of it, the work in process. And so work in process is the enemy of effectiveness. And Agile took that observation and they did things with it. I consider it an operational hygiene factor to understand where do you want to work harder and where do you want to work smarter. What you and I know, and all of you that work in Agile know, is that working smarter can be 10 times more effective than working harder. but most of us, our instinct is to work harder. And so we beat our head against the wall and work harder and harder and harder, get exhausted, and then think, is there a better way? Yes, there's a much better way. Go address the whip.
Yeah. And there was another quote that you, I forget who it was that you quoted, where you said that, our organizations are perfectly designed to get the results that we're actually getting. So if we're trying to figure out how to fix things, we need to understand that it's about
we're getting them by
design right?
today. This one is so powerful. If we just realize that whatever we're getting today, even if we're not happy with it, is coming out of a system. It's coming out of a very reliable system. So let's understand that, even if we're dissatisfied with it, so that we can improve it. So yes, organizations are perfectly designed to get the results they're getting today. It's like, let's understand that systems are at play here, and what we want to do is create a better system.
Right, and so that means that you also say don't blame the people, right? So why do you suppose, there seems to be a tendency when we see bad performance to assign blame to individuals rather than to the system, and certainly not to ourselves as leaders.
Yeah. So Anne and I have a podcast as well. It's called Fixable with Anne and Francis. I like to call it Fixable AF. But we just had a call in where somebody was lamenting that their employees weren't working hard enough. And what we found, this won't be a surprise to you, so they were judging, they were criticizing their employees. And what we found, of course, is that they were not practicing any sort of prioritization, and they were just giving them too many things to work on. It wasn't their employees' fault at all. I think the person would have passed a lie detector test saying, do I think it's my employees' lackadaisical nature? Yes, they really thought it. So I think we just have too narrow of an aperture of what could be the culprit. Because once we open up that lens and we have people realize, oh my gosh, it's the things I'm putting in front of them, then I don't find that people are stubborn in accepting it. They just don't come to it on their own.
Well, we also blame our customers too, right?
It's, I think, a very similar thing. We have to widen the aperture. Like, I don't get the sense that people are opposed to it. Now, I think a great thought is, why don't we widen the aperture? Why are we so satisfied with with blaming the messenger? Essentially is what we're doing, right? We're focusing on the symptom and not the cause. And it's frankly why in our most recent book we have 1/5 of the book is devoted to identifying the real problem, because most of us spend most of our time on the symptom, and it is an infinite game to address the symptom. The symptoms will never go away if you don't go to the root. But we find it so so pervasive that we've actually, 1/5 of the book is devoted to it.
Yeah, so on Monday, which is the first
Monday,
part.
Which is otherwise known as Monday.
Yeah, and you talk about the importance of curiosity, right? Curiosity without judgment. I have a whole lecture that I give on the difference between a complaint culture and an idea culture, right? And
nice.
My point is that the difference between a complaint and an idea is entirely in the eye of the recipient, right? And that if you treat complaints like ideas and sources of information, then that's going to lead to improvements. But if you treat ideas like complaints, then you're going to get like retrenchment and defensive,ness and so
really
forth.
nice.
So I try to coach my students to, create an idea culture by learning how to listen and learning how to pay attention. But the problem you identify on Monday is that the information which is sitting at the periphery, this is just a classic organizational design problem, right? The information that's at the periphery doesn't make it to the center or to the folks that need to be able to make these decisions. What's the problem there? Is that primarily an organizational design problem, or is that a cultural problem?
I think it's cultural, not organizational design. The reason I say that is I can imagine many, many, many organizational designs that could solve for it. So I think it's a cultural thing. I think that, and it's to your point, it's a culture of curiosity, because, when we see the symptoms and then you have a bunch of doers in the organization, they see the symptom and then they just go to get to work on it, and you see people complaining about the symptom, and people are rewarding immediate effort in that way, as opposed to with curiosity asking, why is that occurring? And as we mentioned in the book, we take a lot of inspiration from Toyota back in their, like the
Five
days where they
whys.
influenced all of us. The 5 whys, right? We are 5 layers away. Probably we are 5 layers away from the symptom to the cause. And I have to tell you, in most people, in most organizations, either address the symptom or they address 1 layer away. And we just haven't conditioned ourselves into, so I tell people, you're a minimum of 3 away. If you think you're addressing it in 3, you're not. Like, minimum of 3, and see if you can't get to 5. And of course, you stop asking when it converges, when you're learning no new information. So I do think that curiosity is a cultural artifact. It's a cultural behavior. It's a cultural mindset. And when you have it, the symptoms are delightful to you because you're going to get curious about it. But so many organizations have the "don't bring me a problem unless you bring me a solution," which is the opposite of curiosity. It's guaranteed not to have very much improvement. Like there's so many things wrong with it, and yet so many people feel like they're being good managers when they say it because somebody said it to them, and then they're repeating it with the same amount of confidence.
Well, it's like saying to your, smoke detector, hey, look, I don't want a smoke detector that just goes off when there's a fire. I want a smoke detector that, comes with a little rope that'll go out the window, all that kind of stuff. Otherwise, I don't want the damn smoke detector. I mean, it seems crazy that say no to useful information.
Yeah, and I also, it also misdiagnoses that problem identification can be a solo sport. It really can. But solutions of consequence, it's almost never a solo sport. So stop asking me for only the trivial subset of problems and solutions that I can co-locate. Let me help you identify the big problems, and then let's get a team of people to come up and do the root cause analysis and figure out the solutions.
Well, look, you've worked in a lot of companies, including Harvard Business School, but you also did some work with Uber. And I remember this story with Uber. And you mentioned that when you first met Travis Kalanick, I mean, the guy seemed to be blindsided by all the problems, right? So he had insulated himself from the potential warning signs, and by the time he got access to them, it was too late. And I wanted to contrast that because at Harvard Business School, you identified a situation where there were some problems, and those problems percolated up, and you guys were able to address them. I work in a university, and I always wonder this. I'm on the assembly line. I'm cranking out students. Right? They're my final product, and as someone on that assembly line, I think, where's my and-on cord? Like, if I identify a problem with, say, the students, right, where they're struggling in a particular way, or they're developing or failing to develop in the ways that we want them to, where do I pull that cord? Right.
Yeah.
How do I express my concerns? And you found yourself in a position where you could actually do that. So I was wondering if you could sort of talk about your Uber experience, but then also talk about your Harvard Business School experience.
Yeah, it's a nice question. So I want to say a couple of things. One, I actually didn't think it was too late for Travis. That Travis got pushed out by the board when his parents were in a tragic accident is independent of the thing. That didn't mean we could have solved it on it. So I want to go on the record as saying that. I don't think the problems were beyond his grasp. I think ultimately, but the board took advantage of a tragic situation. At Harvard and at universities, I think we have problems that are just as bad as the problems that Uber was having. Mm-hmm. And we endure them until there are people that just happen to say, you know what, we're not going to endure them anymore. We're going to get curious. Now, it's not that we sit in a position of judgment in academia, but we're just in this, at Harvard, the institution was born before the country. Like, it's hard to get the pace and momentum, and there's so many people that are so comfortable with how things are going that the desire to change isn't there, and it's not a for-profit company, and it's organization, and so it's just this. So I think the reason we were able to do things at Harvard is, one, we had a dean that was super ambitious at the time and really felt the palpable nature of wanting things to be better, and then he let us do that. So we increased the metabolic rate of the institution and did things that typically aren't done. Like there were gender gaps in achievement and sentiment in the MBA program. We closed them. Like that is an astonishing thing to do. We did it in a year, which, just seems unbelievable, but you can do it if you have the license to do it. We had the capability and the motivation, but usually we don't have the license to do it. The thing about Uber is that we had the license to do it. Travis was like, yes, all these problems exist. Yes, they have outpaced me. I need help, which makes him mortal, Michael Jordan, the best basketball player in the world, needed a lot of help. Like it's like mortals need help. We can't do it alone. Now, do all of us wish we could come to that realization sooner? Yeah. But if I could do something for our industry of academia, I would like to inject a little bit more can-do spirit. We're in, as I call in the book, responsible stewardship. We have a lot of trust and we move really slowly. I think we are ignoring there are problems on our watch that we are perfectly fine doing nothing about. And it's actually why we wrote the book. It's not that I'm so fearful of everyone who's moving fast and breaking things, which I operationally find offensive. That's like going to take care of itself almost. What I didn't like is how many people were scared into slowness out of fear of doing something wrong. That's the tragedy that exists in some organizations and some industries, and I think our industry is chief among those.
Now, in some ways, it's unsurprising because there's a lot of market power, right? Harvard is Harvard, and Harvard's going to be Harvard, right, for a long time, no matter what it does, right, because of its reputation. Sometimes I call this the curse of the top 10, right? Like if you're top 10, it ain't broke. Don't fix it. Like don't tinker with it, right? Don't risk anything because then you might kind of fall out of the top 10. So it's unsurprising that there's a little bit of what you say, right? Responsible stewardship.
But we know exactly what will happen in the long term if what you say is true. And we teach leadership. We had Clay on our faculty. We know this. We teach it, and yet we don't absorb it. And that, to me, is a curious thing.
Yeah, so that's why I said it's also, though, unsurprising because people at the top research universities are also the ones who are most exposed to what's happening in the world. I mean, your faculty, our faculty, they're out there, they're talking to companies, they're working with companies, and then our students, I like to talk about how in my digital transformation class, you're somebody who is working with, you're on LinkedIn, you're on Facebook, or Instagram, TikTok, and then you show up at work and you get this green screen that has all sorts of bugs and frictions, and it's like this radical disconnect. But it's also the same thing with our students who, when they move from a company like Google and then come to business school, they experience a lot of frustration because they're like, wait, why is everything here sort of, so backward in many ways? So is it surprising or unsurprising that the business schools are...
First of all, like, for example, when I teach, whether I'm in the classroom, I use the blackboard. I think it's the right way to do it because we can do it organically, versus if I do anything in a digital way, I'm doing it with some amount of advance notice, which means it's not entirely participant-centered. It's performance-centered. So even when I do things... When I teach, I'll go and teach 1,000 people remotely. I use a blackboard as I'm teaching. It's a digital blackboard, but I use a blackboard. So I think there is something to the art of the participant-centered pedagogy that I want to feel nostalgic and romantic. You will learn it deeper and remember it longer if we do it that way. That's the good stuff. That we want to have.
Banning laptops in class, right? That's okay. That's
I would say no. I think laptops in class are bad, and it's because most human beings in 2024 can't resist the temptation to multitask, and you have no reason to use a laptop in class. If I'm writing on the blackboard, why do you need a laptop? Here's what we know. You will remember more if you write it as you're learning it, and it's not because you're going to go back and revisit the notes. It's that's how we digest. So I actually think laptops in class is... slows learning, even though it feels modern. Here's what else is modern. Our attention spans are are short. Now, I want the pedagogy to be so captivating, and I want the questions to be so worthy that we have to really orchestrate the whole thing. But the learning will be so much higher if we do it in a technology-free way in that environment. At least that's my observation. But I'll tell you, there's a place where I have seen the metabolic rate of a group of people far exceed anyone else. And I can just talk so at the Harvard Business School, we're not known for our metabolic rate, except for in pockets. Like when we had different pockets of people said, yes, the problems are on our watch. It's up to us to address them. Whereas most people come in and they're like, these are the problems that were here yesterday. They're going to be there tomorrow. I'm only here today. I'm not going to do anything about it. You know who's got, I think, just a delicious metabolic rate at the Harvard Business School? Kareem Lakhani. And you might have come across him, but he has created
I've had him on the podcast. Yeah.
Listen, this man had no permission to go as fast as he did. He lamented. He looked at everyone. He's like, you guys are in the Stone Ages when it comes to this. And so he just politely ignored everyone else and went and did it. And he has catapulted he is as current as you can be in any industry, in an industry that goes really slowly. So I would love to write a case on him on how to do it. But if he can do it, that just to me gives license. Or like we addressed some things back in the day. It is possible, but it seems that it's based on the heroic efforts of individuals. I want us to figure out how to scale it. What were your words? Scaling and replicable. We today still rely on the heroic efforts of individuals. So we have operational work to do.
Right. So if you were to do an attribute map, right? So this
there
is
you go.
Fun concept. The idea that you got to pick and choose what you're going to be good at.
Yeah.
Do you think that organizations they're unwilling to make those difficult choices, and they say, "Oh, we can be good at everything," and then they wind up being mediocre at everything?
I don't think that the slowness that comes in responsible stewardship is coming because we're trying to be good at everything. I think that's a separate problem. I think the slowness comes from we think doing harm is worse than getting gain. We just see an asymmetry there. And to me, what it means is they don't find the current problems important enough to try to change them. And if they did, they would work on it. And so maybe we just have a different lens. I see, unequal access as like, I want to change it. I want to change it right now, and I want to work on it. But maybe in the scheme of the long arc of institutions, it's not as important to someone. So I think it's just they see the downside risk. They're so afraid of the downside risk that they don't see the incremental upside risk. To your point about the being great at everything, that comes when we just think physics doesn't apply to us, and there's a certain arrogance that comes to that.
Well, in the
Jobs.
service sector. So I mean, you talk about in construction, you've got that, that
cost, quality,
impossibility triangle.
speed.
Yeah.
Pick
so
two.
why are people so aware of that in the kind of manufacturing and construction,
Well,
and they don't think about that in service?
Yeah, I think because physics applies more specifically, and when you have something that you can drop on your foot, it's hard to pretend physics doesn't apply. But in services, when you can't drop it on your foot, you can seduce yourself into thinking physics doesn't apply for quite a while. And so, to me, I think that's always been it, is that you can fool yourself in services where you can't fool yourself in manufacturing because literally the physics of it, if you want it to have more features, it's heavier. Like it just, whereas in service, we think it's free to ask, oh yeah, give them more, oh more, oh more. We just think it's somehow free, and we'll rely on, employees to patch it over for a little while.
So look, I mean, everything you've said so far, it sounds totally consistent with this idea, let's increase our cycle time, let's reduce our batch size, let's, be agile, let's move fast. But normally that comes with the break things, right? Move fast and break things. And that's sort of the dogma, at least here in Silicon Valley. And so I think you're trying to add a twist to this. And so
yeah.
Your books are full of wonderful 2x2s. I mean, you can't have a good business book without a couple 2x2s. And so here you
and
say
a couple
move
of
fast
good
and break
footnotes.
things move fast and break things is not the way we want to go. So what's wrong with that?
Well, honestly, because the things are often people. And I don't think it's okay to do damage to Greg to benefit future Francis's. That's like my worldview. And when when people were writing code and the code didn't influence individuals, I don't care if you got the code wrong. And if you wanted to move fast and fix things, and that somehow helps you do faster iterations of code, okay. But when it's humans, I personally, it's a worldview. I personally have a problem with it. That's the first thing. The second thing is it actually seduces you into thinking you are going faster, breaking things along the way. But when you factor in the collateral damage and the rework that you have to do, you're scarcely going faster. You just that somebody else had to pay for it later and you got the advantage of it today. So I think it's also misguided. The third thing is it doesn't take that much to move fast and fix things. So the problem with move fast and break things in my mind is it gave speed a bad name. So many people, if I see a problem today, I'll hear so many people who I love will say, they just went too fast. It's almost never that they went too fast. It's that they broke things. It's that they didn't take care. But taking care doesn't take time. So when we organize the book in Monday through Friday, you don't get to go fast until Friday, but we're still moving fast and fixing things in a week. And organizations are like allocating a year to do something. We think you could do it in a week, and you got to do Monday to Thursday before Friday when you do it. So I still think each time when someone says, they just went too fast, I'm like, you have not gotten to the root of the problem. Even if they took twice as long, they would have broken just as many things. That is addressing the symptom, not the cause.
Well, so I want to talk about this collateral damage because, a lot of people get upset when they see mass layoffs, let's say, right? At a company like Facebook, you hire a bunch of people, you lay a bunch of people off. I mean, I don't really think of that as collateral damage necessarily. Every 2 years we lay off, 300 MBAs, right? And every year you lay off 800 MBAs, right? You're pushing them back out into the world.
You're playing with words in a way I'm not going to play with you in that, Greg. We're not laying them off. We're graduating them.
Well, yeah, but if you spend 2 years at Facebook and then you move on.
Listen, if you went in knowing
job,
you were going to spend 2 years, no problem. If they said you're coming for 2 years, no problem. I agree with you if they do it, and if that's the contract. When you break the contract, I think that's when, and you moved your life out there and you did it, and they told you all the things and you did it. So I'm not sure I totally agree. But here's the thing about layoffs to me. In general, I find most layoffs were avoidable. And so I want the people who didn't do the things that could have avoided them to bear responsibility. But instead, the opposite happens. Not only were they avoidable, but I didn't do the things, and then I get rewarded because my stock goes up after I do it. So I didn't learn the lesson. In fact, I'm going to learn a perverse lesson. And by the way, the stock just goes up for a minute. It doesn't go up in the long term, but you get like this immediate reward. So let me give you an example in Silicon Valley today. You know how like everybody's done layoffs, and everyone's like, I did layoffs, you did layoffs, we all did layoffs. We had to. No one could have imagined. I think the best performing organization in Silicon Valley today is ServiceNow, hands down. It's got faster growth than Facebook or Google had in their early days. The best places to work, customers love it. Like all of the things are happening. They didn't have layoffs. You know why? Because they used AI internally and slowed growth in advance of everyone else doing layoffs. But no one else was thinking about that's the way to use AI. And so they're like, it just happened. It didn't need to. If you used all of that intelligence, all of that capability, and you were as empathetic as ServiceNow to use it internally, and then here's what they get out of it. They're not doing it for motherhood and apple pie. They just got 1 million applications for 1,000 jobs. Why? One reason, because they cared enough internally that they anticipated what was happening using AI. It's not like they were looking at a crystal ball. They to see the patterns and to figure it out. So I actually think layoffs are almost always, not always, but almost always a lack of bad planning and, or the presence of bad planning. And so I would just like the people who are responsible for that to be accountable for it and to own the fact that we did it badly. Like, I don't know if you remember when Elon Musk, when he famously bought Twitter and he did layoffs and maybe a caricature of how to do everything wrong. But on the same day he did layoffs, Stripe did layoffs. And so we got the two, like the same day, you could see the transcript of what Elon said to his employees and what Stripe said to their employees. And so now Stripe didn't anticipate the layoffs, but the guy took responsibility for it in a way that I think strengthened the organization. Like, that's what I mean. Either anticipate it so you don't have to do it, or take responsibility that you did it and you learned the lessons.
Yeah, I guess that was my point. I mean, you can do layoffs. I mean, Airbnb, a great example, when they had to lay off a bunch of people. I mean, they did everything in their power to help these folks find new jobs, right? They tried to, cushion
You can do it with
blow
dignity.
and so
You
forth.
can do it with dignity. Yeah.
Yeah.
You should do it with dignity. You have an obligation to be as generous as you can. But I think you have an obligation to learn so that you needn't have done it before. Like, I'm not sure we code layoffs as the management failure as they mostly are. And so I treat it, and I'm not saying this with any like extra judgment, just learn from it like we do with everything else. Like, great. Yeah, you went through a layoff. What went wrong? Learn from it so that you can avoid it the next time.
Now, you talk about this trust triangle and how important it is to invest in organizational trust. And you could think of this as an investment, right? I mean, you could take a finance lens to it and say, hey, we're going to make these investments and we're going to generate returns from it. I doubt anybody has like a trust budget. I mean, they should. You should have like a capital budget, for trust, and
that's nice.
And a operating budget and so forth. But what struck me when you articulated this trust triangle is how it echoed Aristotle, right? With logos, ethos, and pathos.
And pathos, yeah.
And how, you can do an audit to figure out where the kind of weak link is in this trust triangle that you're trying to cultivate.
When we were doing the research, and we've now done it with hundreds of thousands of people and tens of thousands of companies, and we have found that trust always comes down to three things. Like, if the three things are there, you trust. If one of them is missing, you don't trust. And, for a while we were like, oh my gosh, like these three things, like it feels random, and how could it be three? I have to tell you that logos, pathos, and ethos has given us great comfort that like you can have a trinity. They're interacting in a way that feels rigorous because we didn't theoretically solve for it. We empirically observed it. And so to have comfort that the resting state while we're learning nothing new, we have taken great comfort from Aristotle. In fact, I think in Unleashed, we take great comfort from lots of people that lived 2,000 years ago. That's how we learned high standards and deep devotion from Valerius Maximus. We learn things empirically, and then we get the roots from thousands of years ago. And it is deeply comforting. It is deeply comforting to us.
Yeah, you brought Valmax to my attention, right? And I hadn't really known anything about this guy, Valmax. And I bet Valmax didn't realize that his work could be captured by a 2x2.
A 2x2. But so naturally. And how amazing is it? I mean, for Aristotle, for Valerius Maximus, like 2,000 years later, these ideas are still there. It's like that to me, when we're sampling on the dependent variable of what has made it, there's like really powerful things there. And there's not many people that are more of an inspiration to me than Valerius Maximus. And that's because he took a look out at the world's problems, and this will have a very modern sound to it. And he thought, wow, our challenges of the day are super significant, and our leadership pipeline is insufficient. The magnitude and volume of our problems is rising, and the way in which we develop leaders today, and at the time you had to be born into a family that had leaders to do it. Our leadership pipeline is insufficient. So he said, I'm going to try to address that at scale. And so I'm going to use the modern technology of the day, which is a book. And so he wrote a book on memorable doings and sayings. He wrote several volumes to simulate having been born into a family where all these stories are told. So first of all, like, I love that can-do spirit. We talk about can-do lesbian spirit in our book in a playful way. And just mean we think everybody has an inner lesbian. Oh my gosh, Valerius Maximus had can-do lesbian spirit. I mean, he saw the problem, he did the thing, he used the modern technology to do it. He did it in a very persuasive way. So to me, I take a great inspiration from him.
Yeah, and so maybe we can dig into it, right? So you've got duty and you've got authority. And you talk about how leaders can kind of veer too much in one direction or the other. It seems like a very difficult, almost balancing act to juggle these two things. It reminded me, of course, of the warmth and strength axes that we see elsewhere, right?
And so the way, I went back and I found the first time I gave a card to my MBA students, and it was a laminated card when they was back in 2001, I think it was, and I wrote to them the definition of leadership and high standards and deep devotion, and that's was my take on these things, and people still today show me and it was because people carried wallets. I don't do it anymore. Nobody carries a wallet. But it was all the way back to then that which predated many of these other things, because I think we were all observing the same things that were going on, which is it does feel like a trade-off. It feels like you can either take care, be devoted or warmth, or you can do the others. And then we realize, except it's not always a trade-off. So why is it a trade-off for most of us and most times, and why are others able to overcome the trade-off? And that's then what I think we all became obsessed with, and we all have our way of doing it. But when we sample on the dependent variable of who was able to do both, well, I look at Valerius Maximus, when he spoke about justice, and he was talking about overcoming that trade-off 2,000 years before any of us were doing it. Empirically observing the same thing we're observing, just in ancient times.
Well, look, as a teacher, you're also a leader, and you're faced with all the same trade-offs and challenges that any leader is faced with. And I like how you said in Unleashed that your job as a leader is to help others succeed, right? And by the way, I don't know whether when we do performance evaluations, do we? I mean, how many companies actually include that in their performance evaluation? I mean,
Microsoft. Microsoft does, and I think it attributed. Yeah, and I think it's one of the reasons that they do so well. I think you should explicitly include it. You know who else does it now? The NBA in their over/under. How much better are others when you're on the court versus off the court? I think that's actually a beautiful metaphor for it.
Yeah, I remember there's that article in the New York Times like 20 years ago about, what was it, Shane Battier, right? And how
there
he
it
scored
is.
like 2 points a game.
Daryl Morey.
I forget who wrote that, but
Michael Lewis, and it was Daryl Morey, who was the general manager at the time. That had such great influence on me. I've ended up now working with like 5 of the NBA teams. It stemmed from that. I read it. I reached out to Daryl, developed a relationship with him because it was the thing. But yeah, Shane Battier, he was so valuable and not paid very much because you were paid for individual metrics, but he was so valuable from team metrics, and it's such a close cousin of leadership.
Yeah, and I remember I was at an Animal Behavior Society conference like 25 years ago, and there was a study where they took all these the highest performing egg-laying hens, and they put them all together, and the hen-laying production like completely went to zero because all of the high performers, would battle each other. And so you needed to actually have some low-performing egg layers in the cage with the high performers in order to maximize
Greg,
total output.
I think there is something beautiful in there that I'm not sure I have read about what's the appropriate mix. I think you have something beautiful in there that the world would benefit from, and it probably requires you, who I've never seen the animal, like when you get to look across things and then synthesize it. I think the world would eagerly digest whatever you synthesize on that. I think it's really powerful.
But it means that, in the world of HR analytics, which I've done a lot of work in that area, I mean, we're only at the very beginning of trying to figure out how to measure in an objective way your contribution to the success of others, right? I mean, most of the metrics, sales metrics and so forth, they're so focused on things that are easy to measure. This kind of lateral improvement is much more difficult to measure. I mean, we can look at things like attrition. So if you're a leader, do you have like high turnover? But even that's sort of ambiguous, because if you have a high turnover, it could be that you are, raising people up to the point where they have more opportunities, right? Which might be a good thing. So it's super hard.
I also do, because I love the HR analytics part, right? Because it's the predictive part of it. I actually think everything you just said we can measure. I think so. But what we do in organizations today is we ask managers, somebody left and we were like, is it regrettable or not? And there are incentives to say whether or not it is or not. What you want to do is look at what was somebody's performance rating, and then did they leave? So you want to know, did high performers leave or low performers leave? Don't ask me to label it with this silly thing. Like, I actually think there are some really straightforward things to do that we just look right past, and we make it perhaps a little bit more difficult than it need be. But
well, getting back to this idea of leader and teacher, when we think about that Val-Max trade-off, I mean, it's kind of tough. I like to say that in business schools, at least, we need to be very clear about whether or not we are offering a spa or a personal trainer, right? Because if you come in thinking you're getting a spa and then you get a personal trainer, you're going to be very upset.
So
if you come in looking for a personal trainer and you get a spa, you're going to be very upset.
Yeah.
And I think the personal trainer, that's sort of like
we're offering a personal trainer. There's no school that should offer a spa. Come on.
Yeah, but again, the idea that the customer is always right might mean that we have to educate the customer. You had this great story about how managing customer expectations and helping the customer to become kind of a co-producer, bringing them in and helping them to understand like what is it that we're actually trying to do here is critical. If you're going to get the best results. I completely agree with that.
When I first got access, when I was in the administration, and so I got access to see all of the evaluation data and of all the teaching, and it all existed, but I only ever got to see mine. I never got to see anyone else's, so I had no idea what the patterns were. Patterns were unmistakable. The highest correlation question that you would ask on the survey for how well, to predict how well the overall course rating was and the word for word, the question was, how effectively does how high are the standards that the faculty member sets in class? High standards was the #1 predictor. So I actually think our students want the personal trainer. I'm not saying they won't complain that it's not spa-like, but we have to know which parts to listen to and which not. So that was the #1 correlate. The #2 correlate, and this is actually where I really started to get the high standards and deep devotion parts of it, was how, for lack of better words, how devoted is the faculty to your learning? Not to you, but to your learning. Those two things swamp everything else. How important do you think the topic is? How much did you know on the way in? Like all of the other questions. Noise. The only two that mattered were, do they set high standards in the classroom? That was primary. And secondary, how devoted are they to your learning? I actually think it's quite generalizable to teaching, leadership, and parenting, quite honestly.
Yeah, I mean, should we be evaluating these instructors, ex post, right? So maybe, 2-3 years later. I mean, I don't think you would have any problem getting high teaching awards in either case, but
I actually think, I'll be fine to have the rating be how you performed on the exam. Mm-hmm. Don't let me grade it, and then I'd like to give you the exam right when we're done, and then give you the exam again right before graduation. Mm-hmm. So how much did you do that was retained? I'd be totally fine with that, because I know the right way to get the learning. Now, it turns out it's doing those two things, which the students also say matter to them in the moment. And here's the thing that's great. Every day the students would say, oh, please end early. And you would get skewered on evaluations if you ended early.
Yeah.
So even the students are making the right calculus over the arc of a semester.
Mm-hmm. Now, look, a lot of your work lately has been around inclusion. And I was wondering if you could dig into this, because I think, it's a buzzword everybody talks about. Inclusion. I mean, DEI, and
it's gotten weaponized, certainly.
Highly controversial and all this sort of thing. Yeah. But I mean, inclusion, in a way, it just seems like common sense, right?
It's not it's not a controversial thought, but it has been weaponized. And my experience is, once things are weaponized, you can try to reclaim them, or you can let them go. It's like when I go into organizations that have some of their cultural values have been weaponized, and the cultural values were so good and made so much sense. But once they're weaponized, I used to try to claw them back. I've never seen it successful. So now maybe this is just my pragmatism. Once something has been weaponized, I think you got to let it go. So no one who knows what inclusion really is would be able to reasonably argue against it. But there are a lot of people who don't know what it is arguing against it, and enough of them were prominent enough people that it's become taken on a life of its own. So we probably are going to need some new language for it. But to your point, if I asked you a series of questions, will we make better ideas if we get more opinions? Yes. When we make the world better for some, should we make sure we do it in a way that doesn't make it worse for others? Yeah. Like the set of questions would all be yeses. And so we might just have to do it from a fresh slate. But inclusion, to me, the reason I like it so much is I know of no other thing that can get me achievement and sentiment boosts in performance with no new people and no new technology. So I find inclusion to be an operational superpower. No new people, no new technology, and business performance and employee engagement skyrocket. You had me at hello.
But I mean, do you think that it's the problem that people have with it is that the way that some companies have approached it has been in a relatively simplistic way, right? So like, was it Goodhart's law? You come up with a metric, you come up with some very simplistic metric. Let's count out the number of people who satisfy the various demographic criteria, and boom, we're inclusive, and it doesn't matter whether we're listening to anybody or not, right?
I mean, I think you can, but like anything else, of course you can have like good and bad execution, but it's rare that we throw the whole thing out because some people can have bad execution. I mean, if that were true, we would throw out the entire field of strategy because some people do strategy poorly. But we don't say strategy is bad. We say some people do it poorly. So there is probably something that other people can study other than me. Why is this one we want to throw the thing out as opposed to say that's bad execution? This one, my guess is there's something heated about it that I would need others to study.
Well, I was asking a different question, not about tossing it out, but whether or not organizations have a tendency to look for quick fixes. I mean, it's a lot easier to check some boxes than it is to actually do the hard work of designing systems where you can actually harness these voices and come up with powerful ways of integrating them into decision making. I mean, that requires organizational change, and that's tough stuff.
And sometimes the people that we put in charge, we gave no organizational power to, and so they were only doing what they could do. And so I think that a cynical way of looking at it is an organization didn't care enough about it to address it, which again, I don't know why you wouldn't if you really understood its benefit. So I think an organization was misguided in not understanding its benefit, and then said to a few people, we're going to give you no resources and go and make us feel good. Like, that's of course silly. And I think that did happen in some cases. But, if I look back at it, like, why were people so interested in studying inclusion? And it was because some people were systematically being left out. And then I look today, why are some people so mad at inclusion? And they're like, well, they feel like some people are systematically being left out. They have the same root cause. Mm-hmm. Let's actually solve the root cause, which to me is simply when we make the world better for some, we got to do it in a way that makes it better for all. And that just means we can only use a subset of the solutions that you might have come up with if you were willing to make it better for some at the expense of others. But those, as a human species, we reject those. And I think for good reason.
Well, I mean, you talk about these ideas as being old ones, not only Val Max, but I think Chris Argyris, I mean, his work is something that you lean on quite a bit. Hero. He's probably the most recognized management theorist the last 50 years.
I completely agree. The current book that Ann and I are writing, we're single-handedly trying to, not single-handedly, we're trying to right that wrong because his discuss the undiscussable, I think, is like one of the most profound things. I will say that when I read his work, sometimes I get lost. So if ever someone needed a co-author, if I gave Chris Argyris a time machine, I would just say, get a co-author. You were like we just do things better in pairs. But I completely agree with you. The world has not yet digested all of the beauty of his ideas, and we're going to do our small part in our next book to try to right that wrong.
Mm-hmm. So if we were to think about the inclusion dial, right? Mm-hmm. So first of all, you can't change things that you can't measure, right? So how do we measure inclusion? I mean, if you're not, I mean, if the lack of inclusion is about not really listening to the voices in the organization, then you're probably never even going to identify the fact that you don't have inclusion, because you need to have you need to first listen to people who are telling you that you aren't being listened to, right?
So I think a lot of it is measurable. So if safety is the foundation of inclusion, which I know you've had Amy Edmondson on this podcast, and she wrote an amazing article on how psychological safety is the foundation of inclusion. And I would add to it, as are physical and emotional safety. So in a manufacturing context, most unsafe things happen at shift changes. And so if you really want to be inclusive in a pay extra attention at the shift changes, because that's usually when we're off our game. That's where like most deaths occur and things like that. Emotional safety, well, that's bullying. And that is and we just put a podcast episode out today, which is such a charged topic. Like for our kids, we know that the bullies are the bad guys and the targets of the bullies are those that need to be protected. But in workplaces today, we treat the bullies as the good guys and the targets as the ones that should be shunned and ostracized. So we have a work to do on emotional safety. So we call safety, and it's both it's all three: physical, emotional, and psychological safety. You can measure all three of those things. You can measure all three of them. Amy has beautiful rubrics for the psychological. We can do the others. So safety first. And then you get to welcome, which is, it's not that I'm just safe enough to do it, but is my voice welcomed? I actually think with sentiment surveys, you can get that too. It feels quite measurable. Then the next one, which is counterintuitive, but again, I think measurable, are you celebrated for your unique perspectives? And it's amazing. The number of organizations I go into when people are like, no, I'm not. I'm celebrated when I say what I sense other people want to hear, and I'm treated with a little more skepticism when I celebrate when I say what I uniquely know. I think totally measurable. And then the last part, championed. Are you celebrated, and do you celebrate someone's uniqueness into their absence? I look at all our promotion discussions in academia. I can tell you how much celebration and non-celebration there is for uniqueness. So I'm actually not sure it's not measurable. I'm just not sure we have the courage to measure it. Mm-hmm. That's at least my take.
And sometimes when I teach courses on innovation, I use this very operational approach where we've got idea generation, idea evaluation, and idea execution. And then, going through and looking for where are the bottlenecks. And, oftentimes it's the stuff on the back end. If it's not executed, then no one's going to bother to evaluate. And if it's not being evaluated, then people will sort of stop generating it, right? And so these ideas they might boil up inside people's heads, but they never actually express them, perhaps out of fear, but oftentimes just out of a sense of futility, right? And I think you talk a bit about how you periodically have to decalcify people. And I love this term of decalcify, because I have to do that with my coffee machine, right? Once a month, I got to put that stuff in. And I think you were talking about like call center workers and how they just kind of get burnt out and bitter and get upset. But I think it goes, you could imagine that at a much bigger level where people, they just give up. And then how do you, if you're going to come in and change the organization and say, okay, now we're open for business. We're going to listen to you, you're included, but people become habituated. They don't trust that. They don't believe it. They're like, yeah, whatever. I've seen this before. How do you actually do the decalcification to kind of unleash and open up the spigots of idea generation?
So one of it is, I think that the decalcification process is a cathartic process, right? I have to, and those calls, like, you have to be able to talk about what's going on. Now, and I think gaslighting is when I talk about it and you say that's not happening, right? Yeah. So we have to be able to talk about it in a way that we're not gaslit for talking about it. I think that's like number one, which means people have to agree that this is part of our reality. I think number two is we got to stop designing systems that rely on the heroic efforts of individuals. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean,
And
we know if something takes 5 clicks, you know, if you're lying in a pool of blood and you got to call 911 357 423, you're just going to die. You know, it's got to be 3 digits. You know, you're not going to, you know.
Right. So there's like the elegance of the simplicity. And then also, you know, we put up with bad processes, but we let heroic individuals do all of the work to overcome them. So there is this great work that was done by Anita Tucker, who's an amazing academic. And she found that if you would go to a hospital and see all the workarounds that nurses do in their everyday, just, you know, the towels aren't where they're supposed to be. So they go get the towels. This isn't where it's supposed to be. So they go get that. Well, what they're all doing is solving the problem, but not surfacing the problem, which means everyone, every shift has to solve the problem.
This is like the indignities list, right, that you talk about. I love this term.
Yeah. But when you surface the problem and permit the organization, which has to want to solve it, she found just these little things were 1 hour a shift for every person, for every nurse, for every shift. Things like the towels are in the wrong place. Things that no one would even think, I'm not going to tell anyone, I'm just going to go solve it. So I think there is also that going on, is that when is it enough for us to surface? And again, if you said to someone, don't bring me a problem with your solution, or you only want to hear the good things, I want people to want to know, is there anything you're doing that someone who cares deeply about how people other than you have to perform this work, is there anyone who cares deeply about that you think I should know? That's about all you got to say. People will be delighted to tell you, well, the towels aren't there. I had to do this. I had to do that. I'm not asking that you're dissatisfied with. Is there anything as the architect of this, for future people, should we be considerate of anything? And then that's what I say, go well rested, full pad of paper and a few extra pens, and listen. And people will tell you, as long as you ask it in a way that people believe that you're actually listening.
So, I mean, is there like a broken windows approach to this? I mean, if people, they see like a, you know, emergency exit signs broken, and they're like, oh, well, I don't even know who to call. And if you do call, like nothing happens. And does that discourage people from then trying to tackle the bigger problems? Certainly.
And I also think that, let's say you're an organization where bullying occurs. And I know there's bullying, you know there's bullying. So the next time you see bullying, are you likely to surface it? Well, the organization already is enduring and indulging bullies. Why would I surface the next one? The only bad thing I could imagine it would be to happen to me. So yeah, I think if that's broken windows, yeah, it's a real thing. When organizations reveal that problems on their watch that they know keep going, that's why I don't like the responsible stewardship. You're saying you know these problems exist, but it's not worth it to solve it. That to me is the real damage.
Do you think we need a new kind of Me Too movement? I mean, the Me Too movement, I think, certainly with respect to awareness, certainly raised the level of awareness of sexual harassment in the workplace. But that's only a subset of the kind of harassment and abuse that happens in the workplace. I see white males abusing white males, like, you know, not in a sexual way, but in just a horrible psychological way. Do we need to have like a broader movement, like Me Too, you know, for everybody?
Well, so here's what I know from an operations perspective. Organizations that surface problems at a faster rate improve at a faster rate and win. What I've just said is an uncontroversial statement. If I'm in a team that surfaces problems at a faster rate than you, I will improve at a faster rate because of that. So I think what we want to do is redefine what an employee hero is. Instead of the employee hero is enduring, I want the employee hero to be the surfacer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, in other words, you get discovery points, right? It's like
now you're talking. Let's give discovery points. Points. Because the thing I have learned is that allies are so important. Like there's the people that are involved, but the rest of us see it, but we don't know what we're supposed to do with that knowledge and that observation. But imagine if we could productively surface.
Right. And so this is this is
Discovery
this is
points.
an agenda.
I like it, Greg. Yeah.
This is an agenda for leaders, right? You should be evaluated based on how successful the people are who work for you. And part of the metric of success is, are they successful at identifying problems and bringing them to the attention of people who can actually solve them? Francis, thank you so much for joining me. These are fantastic books. We've got Uncommon Service, Unleashed, and the latest book, Move Fast and Fix Things. Thanks for joining me.
So the way my brain works is that I like the pattern matching. So I was really disappointed we didn't have a third book that began with un.
Right. Well, you could just put that in some kind of invisible ink, and people will find it. So,
but
thanks so
Greg,
much. We'll
thank
talk
you.
again.
I don't think I've talked to you for 30 years, and let's make sure it's much quicker than that this next time.
unSILOed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.